They don't have to lie out loud to deceive you. Some people don't need to make up stories. All they need is to avoid eye contact, smile at the right moment, or subtly change the subject. And you'll believe a version of reality that's not real. The most dangerous lies aren't spoken. They're hidden in the silence you ignore. Your intuition isn't wrong. You're just silencing it. Ever felt like something was off, but you brushed it aside and told yourself you were overthinking? The truth is, the most skilled liars don't make you suspicious, they make you question yourself. And the moment you stop trusting your gut, you start losing control of the truth. They're not avoiding you, they're avoiding the truth. When someone laughs at serious topics, tells stories that sound too perfect, or keeps things vague, they're not just being quirky, they're building a wall between you and the truth. Piece by piece, these behaviors create a narrative that protects them and shields their lies from exposure. In a world where everyone wants to present the best version of themselves, truth often gets buried beneath politeness, charm, or performative perfection. But you don't need to be a detective to spot a liar. You just need to pay attention to the signs they unknowingly reveal. In today's video, we're breaking down 8 clear signs that someone is lying to you, from how they speak, how they react, to how they construct emotional illusions. These red flags are subtle, but once you know them, you'll never see certain people the same way again. 1. Quick to change the subject. Have you ever tried to bring up something serious, something that truly mattered to you, only to watch the other person skillfully redirect the conversation like a magician pulling a vanishing act? 1 second, you're talking about your future, your boundaries, or your need for honesty, and the next, they're suddenly asking what's for dinner, or rambling about some random story they saw online. It feels subtle at first, even harmless. You tell yourself, maybe they're just not ready, or I might be overreacting. But deep down, there's a flicker of awareness you can't ignore. This isn't forgetfulness. This is evasion. When someone quickly changes the subject after you've asked a meaningful question, that's not just a social quirk. It's a behavioral defense. It's their internal alarm saying, this is too close to the truth, run. And often, we let them, not because we're naive, but because we're hopeful. We want to believe they just need more time, more space, more understanding. But in reality, they're not avoiding the topic. They're avoiding responsibility. Here's what most people don't realize. Conversation is not just about words. It's a mirror. It reflects how 2 people value truth, openness, and emotional maturity. If every time you reach for clarity, the other person pulls away with a convenient detour, they're not just distracting you, they're teaching you who they are. They're telling you, without saying it, that they'd rather preserve their comfort than nurture your clarity. And that says a lot more about their intentions than any spoken excuse ever could. I've seen it firsthand. I was in a relationship where every attempt to talk about where we were headed turned into a game of emotional dodgeball. I'd ask about long-term goals, about real challenges we needed to face as a couple, and they'd respond with something light-hearted or completely irrelevant. At first, I took it as a sign of nervousness, then, as a lack of emotional readiness. But eventually, I saw the pattern for what it truly was: avoidance. And behind that avoidance was fear, not of me, but of being exposed, fear of accountability, fear of having to show up for something real. We often think lying means inventing a story or telling a bold-faced falsehood. But the most dangerous lies are the silent ones, the ones hidden in the subject changes, in the casual deflections, in the silence that grows when truth tries to speak but keeps getting drowned out. When someone avoids your question not once, but repeatedly, what they're doing is eroding trust piece by piece. Not with malice, but with subtle detachment. That's how dishonesty creeps in, not with a shout, but with a whisper that says, "Let's talk about anything but that." And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Many of us play along, not because we don't know better, but because we fear rocking the boat. We tell ourselves that staying silent or letting it go preserves the peace. But what peace, exactly? Peace that's built on half-truths is nothing more than quiet erosion. Every time we let someone steer away from a hard conversation, we give them silent permission to stay hidden. We let the lie grow roots. But honesty, real honesty, isn't afraid of discomfort. It doesn't flee from tough conversations. It leans in. It chooses courage over convenience. When someone values the relationship, whether it's friendship, love, or family, they won't run when things get real. They won't hide behind distractions or act like serious questions don't deserve answers. They'll show up, even if they're unsure, even if they're scared, because respect is shown not in how we act when things are easy, but in how we respond when we're asked to be real. There's a deeper truth here. Changing the subject might seem small, but it's a signal. It's a blinking red light telling you that someone is more invested in keeping up appearances than building something authentic with you. They don't want resolution. They want escape. And while that might not make them evil or malicious, it certainly makes them unreliable. You owe it to yourself to recognize these patterns, not with anger, but with clarity, because awareness is your power. When someone dodges your sincerity with distraction, that's not a reflection of your intensity, it's a revelation of their resistance. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to realize that every time you allowed the subject to change, you were abandoning your own need for truth. Here's the reminder no one wants to hear. People who care about you don't run from uncomfortable questions. They might not have perfect answers, but they stay in the conversation. They stay present. And the ones who don't? They're showing you a truth that words never could. So pay attention to the deflections, the diversions, the sudden shifts in topic when things get real. Because when the truth knocks, and someone scrambles to leave the room, that's not just evasion. That's exposure. 2. Listening to respond, not to understand. There's a kind of silence that feels louder than words when someone nods, maintains eye contact, even smiles, but you can feel they aren't really with you. They're just waiting for their turn to speak, waiting to deliver their brilliant response, waiting to reclaim control of the conversation. And while their lips may be sealed in that moment, their mind is miles away, rehearsing lines, framing comebacks, calculating what they'll say next. That's not listening, that's performance. And it's one of the most overlooked signals that someone isn't being genuine with you. We often underestimate the power of being truly heard. In a world driven by speed and noise, most people aren't seeking advice, they're starving for understanding. But a person who's hiding something, someone who's trying to manipulate or maintain a false front, will rarely give you the gift of undivided attention. Because to truly listen is to surrender control. It means letting the other person's truth land, unfiltered, And liars? They don't want truth landing anywhere near them. I remember a conversation that changed everything for me. I was speaking with someone I trusted deeply, pouring out how I felt, trying to explain the growing distance I sensed. They nodded, interjected with the occasional "him," but their responses were like pre-written scripts, disconnected, mechanical. I realized they hadn't heard a single word I'd said. Not really. They were listening to reply, not to understand. And worse, their replies weren't designed to comfort me. They were crafted to redirect the spotlight, to reassert control, to cover cracks in their own story. That moment taught me something vital. Real listening is an act of vulnerability. It requires presence, and presence can't be faked. The difference between someone who listens to understand and someone who listens to respond is like night and day. One invites trust, the other creates suspicion. When someone truly listens, their entire energy softens. They lean in. Their responses aren't immediate, they're thoughtful, measured, and sometimes they don't respond at all. They just hold space for your words to breathe. But when someone is hiding something, their energy tightens. They're quick with answers, defensive with tone, and too polished in delivery. Because deep down, they're not engaging with your truth. They're building a defense around theirs. And it's not always malicious. Sometimes, people listen to respond out of insecurity. They feel threatened by silence. They fear what might emerge if they truly let you speak without interruption. But regardless of the motive, the outcome is the same: disconnection. When you feel unheard, even in a room full of words, it chips away at trust. Slowly, quietly, fatally. Here's the deeper truth. When someone avoids deep listening, they're not just avoiding your message. They're avoiding what that message might trigger. Because if they listen closely, they might have to admit something, a flaw, a contradiction, a responsibility they've been dodging. And people who build their identity on illusion can't afford that kind of reflection. They stay on the surface for a reason, because the deeper waters hold truths they don't want to face. You'll notice it in the subtle cues. They interrupt, even politely. They bring the topic back to themselves. They fill silences too quickly, as if afraid of what the quiet might reveal. And worst of all, they pretend to understand, but their actions show they never truly grasped what you needed them to hear. That's the thing about honesty. It doesn't just exist in what's said. It lives in how we receive what's said. A person who values truth doesn't just speak it, they create space for others to share it. And that starts with listening. Not to answer, not to defend, not to outshine, but to understand. When someone fails to do that repeatedly, especially in moments that matter, ask yourself, why? Is it discomfort? Deflection? Or are they simply unwilling to confront the impact of your truth? Because if they truly respected you, they'd let your words land without immediately filtering them through their own agenda. Listening, at its core, is an act of love, an act of courage. It says, I'm here. I'm not trying to fix you. I just want to understand you. But when someone listens only to respond, they reduce your experience to a launching pad for their own thoughts. And that's not communication, it's control. We need to normalize calling this out, not with aggression, but with clarity. Did you really hear what I said? Or, can you tell me what you understood from that? These aren't confrontational questions, they're clarifying ones. Because real conversations, the kind that heal, connect, and deepen trust, can't happen when one person is just rehearsing their next line. You deserve to be heard without interruption, without deflection, without someone twisting your words into a platform for their own ego. And if someone consistently fails to give you that, if their listening feels more like a performance than a presence, it's a sign worth paying attention to. Because silence isn't always golden. Sometimes, it's the loudest proof that you're standing alone in the conversation. 3. Defensive without cause. Ever ask a simple question, only to be met with a reaction that felt wildly out of proportion? Something like, "Hey, did you finish the report?" And suddenly, the air shifts, their voice sharpens, their body stiffens. They look at you like you just accused them of something criminal. And before you know it, you're the one on the defensive, explaining why you even asked. That's not normal. That's not just sensitivity. That's deflection, and it's one of the clearest signs someone has something to hide. When someone reacts with unnecessary defensiveness to a harmless question, it's rarely about what you asked. It's about what they fear you're getting close to. This behavior doesn't just pop up from nowhere. It comes from an internal alarm system being triggered. The truth they're trying to avoid is inching a little too close. And the only way they know how to protect it is by turning the spotlight back on you, through drama, intensity, and overreaction. It's not about your tone. It's not about timing. It's about them feeling cornered by their own lies. I've experienced this firsthand. I remember working with someone who consistently missed deadlines. One day, I asked, calmly, with no edge, how their portion of the project was going. Instead of a clear answer, I got an emotional outburst. "Why are you always checking on me? Do you think I'm not doing my job?" And that was the moment it clicked. They weren't reacting to my words. They were reacting to their own guilt. My question simply brushed against the door they were trying so hard to keep closed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When someone is genuinely honest and transparent, they don't fear questions. They don't get agitated when you ask them for clarity. If they've got nothing to hide, they welcome the chance to explain, to reassure, to show up with facts instead of fire. But someone who's built a narrative around avoidance will treat every innocent inquiry like a threat. Their instinct isn't to clarify, it's to defend, to shield, to distract you from what they hope you never discover. It's important to understand this behavior through the lens of psychology. Guilt doesn't sit quietly. It leaks out, and defensiveness is its favorite escape route. When a person feels exposed, even slightly, they lash out not because of what you've done, but because they're terrified of being unmasked. They don't want to lie outright. That would take effort. Instead, they try to control the energy of the conversation. Make it too uncomfortable for you to keep digging. That way, you'll drop it, not because they answered your question, but because they overwhelmed you with emotion. This is emotional manipulation disguised as sensitivity. And it works. It makes good people second-guess themselves. It turns truth seekers into peacekeepers. And that's exactly what the liar is hoping for. If they can make you feel like the bad guy just for asking, they've already gained power over the narrative. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Genuine strength doesn't fear questions. It embraces them. If someone overreacts to basic curiosity, they're waving a red flag. Whether they realize it or not, they're telling you, "I'm hiding something, and I don't want to talk about it." And while they may mask it as being misunderstood or attacked, the real attack is on your attempt to seek clarity. These reactions are more than emotional responses. They are calculated shields, sometimes subconscious, sometimes deliberate, but the effect is always the same. They blur the lines. They shift the focus, and slowly, you begin to walk on eggshells around them, afraid to bring up anything real. But you cannot build trust on a battlefield of guilt and silence. Relationships, whether professional or personal, thrive on openness, not intimidation. If someone makes you feel guilty for seeking truth, it's not your courage that's the problem. It's their lack of transparency. The deeper message here is about emotional maturity. People who have nothing to fear don't explode over simple questions. They don't weaponize tone or volume to cover their trail. They respond with calm, with confidence, with clarity. That's how you spot someone who's rooted in truth versus someone tangled in deception. It's not your job to decode every outburst, but it is your right to question what feels off. And when a pattern emerges, when every small question is met with big drama, that's your cue to stop shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. You're not too direct. You're not too suspicious. You're asking questions that deserve answers. Don't be distracted by noise. Listen to what their reaction is telling you. Is it fear or transparency? Avoidance or accountability? Because people who value honesty don't treat your curiosity like an attack. They meet it with respect. And if they can't do that, you need to ask yourself, what truth are they working so hard to protect? Stay alert, stay grounded, and never apologize for wanting clarity, especially when clarity is exactly what someone is trying to avoid. 4. Over-polished stories. There's a strange feeling you get when someone tells a story that's too perfect. Every word lands exactly where it should. Every detail aligns up with cinematic precision. There's a clean beginning, a powerful climax, a satisfying resolution, and as they speak, you're almost hypnotized, not by the truth of the story, but by how flawlessly it flows. That's your first clue. Real stories, the ones rooted in life and honesty, are rarely so seamless. They're messy, disjointed, imperfect. But when someone gives you a narrative that sounds rehearsed, like they've practiced it in front of a mirror, you're not hearing memory, you're hearing performance. The truth doesn't wear makeup. It doesn't need dramatic pauses, carefully placed humor, or poetic turns of phrase. It shows up with raw edges, awkward silences, and sometimes contradictions, because that's how real life works. But lies are curated. They're sculpted. They're polished to the point that they shine unnaturally bright. And that shine, while impressive, should make you stop and question what they're trying so hard to sell. I once knew someone who had a story for everything. Not just stories, masterpieces. Tales of perfect wins, flawless negotiations, heroic encounters, and every time he shared one, the room would fall quiet. People were captivated. It was hard not to be. But over time, something felt off. The stories never changed. The emotions never wavered. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no, let me think, or I might be misremembering. Just perfectly delivered monologues. And that's when it hit me. Real experiences have texture. They stumble. They evolve. But a lie? A lie is frozen, rehearsed, and meant to impress. When someone is lying, they often overcompensate. They think the more detailed and polished their story is, the more believable it becomes. But ironically, it's that very perfection that makes it suspicious. They've taken out all the wrinkles, all the ums, all the doubts, all the human hesitation. What you're left with is a story that's been ironed flat. And in doing that, it's lost the authenticity that truth naturally carries. And here's where things get more layered. People don't just polish stories to deceive you, they polish them to protect themselves, to control how they're seen, to manipulate your perception without ever outright lying. They know you're more likely to believe a clean, coherent narrative than a messy, scattered one. That's human nature. We like patterns. We crave structure. And they weaponize that desire to quietly bend reality in their favor. But when you listen closely, there are always cracks. Maybe they remember too much. Maybe they recall exact dialogue from months ago, word for word. Maybe their story is too emotionally consistent, never shifting in tone or energy, no matter how many times they tell it. That's not how real people remember real events. Memory fades, emotion fluctuates, but someone who's lying keeps it locked in, pristine, untouched by time, because it was never a memory. It was a script. It's important to ask yourself why someone needs their story to be perfect. Is it because they're proud? Or because they're afraid that if they drop the act, the truth beneath will ruin the image they've worked so hard to build? There's a difference between storytelling and storytelling with an agenda. The first is about sharing. The second is about control. And let's be honest, most of us want to believe the story. We want it to be true. We want the ending to make sense, the timing to be right, the character to be admirable. That's why these polished lies slip past us so easily. They feel good, they sound right, but that comfort is an illusion. Because when you strip away the presentation, what's left often doesn't hold up. You don't need to be cynical. You just need to be aware. When something sounds too perfect, don't immediately assume it's true. Ask yourself what's missing. Ask yourself what part of the story feels emotionally flat despite the words being vivid. Ask yourself if the storyteller is sharing from the heart or just reciting a script they've told too many times to count. Real connection comes from real stories. The kind with flaws. The kind with pauses. The kind where someone says, "I'm not sure if I remember this part exactly." Or, "Maybe I got that wrong." That kind of honesty builds trust. But when someone always has the perfect tale, you're not connecting with their reality, you're connecting with their image. And that image may be more fiction than fact. Be curious, be kind, but most importantly, be discerning. Not every beautiful story is built on truth. And not every truth is beautiful. But it's the messy, imperfect stories, the ones told with trembling voices and unfinished thoughts, that will always carry the weight of something real. And that's worth far more than any polished performance. 5. Body turned away from you. You can tell a lot about a person not by what they say, but by how their body reacts when the truth gets close. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone's words seemed polite, even engaged, but their body was telling a completely different story? Their shoulders angled away, their feet pointed toward the exit, their arms crossed in quiet resistance. They'd meet your voice, but never your eyes. That's not just bad posture. That's the body trying to escape a truth the mouth refuses to admit. People often think lying is all about words, but the body tells on us first. Long before someone speaks, their posture reveals their discomfort. Long before they admit anything, their body is already retreating. When someone turns away from you, even slightly, while you're speaking. It's not random, it's instinct. It's the subconscious whispering, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be seen. And that's exactly where you need to look closer. I learned this lesson through a friend who, every time we reached an emotionally honest topic, would subtly turn away. At first, I chalked it up to habit or discomfort. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he didn't like sitting still. But patterns don't lie. The shift would always come at the exact moment a conversation touched something personal, something real. It was like his body wanted to exit before his words even had the chance to follow. Eventually, I found out there were things he wasn't saying. Small lies, hidden truths, but his posture had confessed long before his voice did. We tend to underestimate the power of presence. When someone is truly with you, their entire being leans in. They face you. They hold eye contact. Their energy stays rooted, even in discomfort. They stay present because they respect the moment. But when someone's body shifts, turns, recoils, they're not just uncomfortable with the conversation. They're uncomfortable with what it might uncover. It's a silent tug of war between the appearance of connection and the desire to run. Now here's what makes this even more subtle. A person can smile at you, nod at all the right moments, and still have their body turned just far enough to create emotional distance. And we often ignore that. We're trained to listen to words, not watch posture. But your nervous system knows. You feel it, that quiet disconnection, that invisible wall, that tension between what's being said and what's being shown. And if you pay attention to that feeling, you'll catch truths that words are working overtime to hide. This isn't about reading too much into a gesture. It's about recognizing that the body doesn't filter like the mind does. The mind chooses words carefully. The body simply reacts. And when someone is lying or withholding, they often can't sit still. They can't square up with you. They're constantly adjusting, fidgeting, turning, as if every second of honesty burns a little more than they can handle. We also have to talk about eye contact. Because people think liars never make eye contact. That's not always true. Some look straight at you, almost too intensely, as if trying to overcompensate. But others? They look away, not once, repeatedly, not because they're shy, but because looking you in the eye means confronting the truth reflected back at them. And that mirror is something they'd rather avoid. Pay attention to how people position themselves around you. Are they leaning in or pulling away? Are their feet still, or shifting? Are they angled toward you or facing the door? These are not trivial cues. These are signals. Signals that speak before the voice ever gets involved. And when someone's body keeps retreating, even while their words pretend to stay, you have to ask yourself, what are they hiding? Real honesty stands its ground. It doesn't squirm under silence. It doesn't shift to the side when challenged. It stays still, present, willing, because the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, doesn't flinch. It doesn't need to. When someone can't face you, it's rarely about you. It's about what they can't bring themselves to admit. Their guilt has weight, and it pulls their body away. They may laugh. They may talk. They may even sound sincere, but if their body is pulling back, the message is clear. Something's wrong. Learn to trust your observations. Not just what they say, but how they move when they say it. Not just their voice, but their presence. Because the truth is not always spoken out loud, it often shows up in silence. In posture. in the angle of someone's shoulders. And when someone's body turns away while claiming to be honest, they're already halfway out the door of integrity. You just have to decide if you're going to follow their words, or finally start listening to what their body's been trying to tell you all along. 6. Laughing off serious topics. There's a kind of laughter that doesn't sound like joy. It sounds like armor. You bring up something serious, something real, and instead of leaning into it, they chuckle. They brush it off. They make a joke out of it. What you wanted was connection. What you got was a punchline. And while their smile might seem harmless, that reaction says more than any words ever could. Because when someone laughs off a serious moment, they're not trying to lighten the mood, they're trying to escape it. At first, it can be confusing. You think maybe they're just nervous. Maybe they don't know how to handle emotional topics. But as it keeps happening, every time things start to get real, you begin to realize it's not nervousness. It's avoidance. That laughter is a shield, a well-worn reflex designed to steer the conversation away from vulnerability. They're not laughing with you. They're laughing past you. And behind that grin is a discomfort they refuse to admit. I've seen it up close. I was in a relationship where every important conversation was met with a smirk. I'd say, "I feel distant lately," and the response would be a joke, a giggle, "You're just being dramatic." At first, I laughed along, not wanting to seem too intense. But over time, that pattern started to sting, because every time I reached out for depth, I was met with deflection disguised as humor. And eventually, I stopped reaching. That's what happens when real emotions are treated like a setup for a punchline. People shut down. And trust erodes, not with a lie, but with a laugh. We live in a culture that celebrates humor. And yes, laughter can be healing, even disarming in a good way. But there's a difference between using laughter to connect and using it to hide. When someone consistently turns serious topics into jokes, they're not just being lighthearted, they're refusing to meet you at the level where real connection happens. They don't want to sit in discomfort. They don't want to face the emotion, the responsibility, the truth, so they make it funny, hoping you'll drop it, hoping you'll laugh along and move on. But what they don't realize is that laughter, when used as a mask, comes at a cost. It might silence a conversation in the moment, but it plants seeds of doubt that grow over time. You begin to wonder if they take anything seriously. You start questioning whether your feelings matter. And eventually, you stop bringing things up altogether. Because every time you do, you're met not with empathy, but with entertainment. And here's the deeper truth. People who laugh off serious conversations aren't just uncomfortable with the topic. They're often uncomfortable with themselves. Vulnerability feels like exposure. Accountability feels like danger. Humor becomes their safety net, their escape hatch, their way of avoiding the emotional weight of being seen. But avoidance doesn't build trust. It builds walls, and those walls become harder to break down the longer they stay up. Sometimes, we let it slide because we don't want to seem too intense. We tell ourselves, "It's not a big deal," or "Maybe I am being too serious." But every time we do that, we teach the other person that our emotions are optional, that our truth can be laughed off. And slowly, we start to betray ourselves for the sake of keeping things light. But real connection isn't light all the time. It's not supposed to be. It's meant to stretch us, to challenge us, to make us uncomfortable in all the right ways. And if someone can't meet you there, if they turn vulnerability into comedy every time, it's a sign they're not ready to show up with you emotionally. Or worse, they're not willing to. When someone laughs at something that should be taken seriously, ask yourself, what are they trying to avoid? What part of the conversation scares them enough to hide behind humor? Are they really trying to keep things playful? Or are they trying to keep you out? A single joke isn't a red flag, but a pattern is. And when humor becomes their only response to truth, you're not in a dialogue anymore, you're in a performance. One where they get to stay comfortable while you keep reaching for something real. Start listening to what the laughter is covering. Is it fear? Is it guilt? Is it the discomfort of facing themselves? Because the person who jokes every time things get serious isn't just being funny. They're telling you they don't want to go deeper. And if depth matters to you, that matters. Real relationships, real trust, require people who can sit with honesty without flinching. People who can hear your pain without turning it into a joke. People who can meet you at your most vulnerable and not hide behind sarcasm or charm. That's what builds something lasting. That's what builds something real. And if someone keeps laughing when your heart is on the table, maybe it's time to ask yourself, are they laughing because it's funny, or because they're afraid of the silence that comes after the truth? Because sometimes, the joke isn't just a joke. It's a mask. And behind it, there's a truth they're hoping you'll never dare to uncover. 7. Vague when pressed for details. There's something unsettling about asking a simple question and getting a maze in return. You just want clarity, straightforward facts. Names, dates, actions. But instead, you're handed fog. Words that swirl in every direction but never land. They talk a lot but say very little. They circle around your question like it's dangerous. And the more you try to pin things down, the more elusive their answers become. That isn't forgetfulness. That's evasion. And evasion always has a purpose. Vagueness isn't just a bad habit. It's a tactic. When someone is trying to protect a lie, detail becomes the enemy. Because the moment they give you something specific, they give you something you can verify. And that's the last thing they want. So instead, they feed you just enough to quiet your suspicion, but not enough to satisfy your curiosity. It's like chasing shadows. You feel close to the truth, but it keeps slipping through your hands. I once worked with someone who was always talking about the big projects they were working on. Every time we asked how it was going, or who was involved, the response was a blur of corporate buzzwords and non-answers. We're in talks with some key people. Things are moving forward faster than expected. I'm keeping it confidential for now. But it's major. Weeks passed, then months. And eventually, it came out, there was no project, no deal, just an illusion built on vague language that none of us challenged soon enough. People often mistake vagueness for privacy. But there's a difference. A private person might say, I'm not ready to share that yet. That's honest. But a vague person keeps talking without ever telling you anything. They want the appearance of openness without the risk of transparency. And the real danger is that we often let them. We hear a half answer, a clever deflection, and convince ourselves they probably just misunderstood the question. But deep down, we know what's happening. We know when someone is dodging. And the more we let it slide, the more they learn they can get away with it. Vagueness protects lies by keeping things just out of reach. It avoids timelines. It skips names. It resists specifics. It thrives in a gray area where accountability can't grow. And for the person using it, that's the point. They want enough room to adjust their story later if needed, to backtrack, to reframe, to claim misunderstanding. That kind of flexibility only works when their story lacks concrete structure, when it's more smoke than steel. There's also a psychological reason why vague answers feel off. Our brains are wired to seek patterns, resolution, closure. When someone gives us unclear information, our mind starts working overtime to fill in the blanks. And often, we end up doing the work for them, justifying, assuming, giving them the benefit of the doubt. That mental effort creates a strange form of trust. But it's not real trust. It's just exhaustion. We stop pressing because it's easier to accept the half-truth than to keep chasing the whole one. But here's the truth. Honest people don't hide in ambiguity. If they don't know, they'll say they don't know. If they made a mistake, they'll own it. And if they care about you, they won't make you dig through fog just to find the facts. They'll give you clarity, not to impress, but to respect your need to understand. It takes courage to ask for specifics. It takes even more to notice when they're being avoided. And while it may feel uncomfortable to press further, that discomfort is your signal. It tells you something isn't right. It tells you you're standing at the edge of a truth someone is working hard to keep hidden. Watch for the people who talk too much but reveal too little. Who use charm and confidence to distract you from the fact that they're not answering your question. Pay attention to how often they give you answers like, "It's complicated," or "We'll see," or "It's being handled." These aren't real answers, they're placeholders. And if they show up often enough, it's not just a communication issue, it's a character issue. Vagueness is a soft form of deception. It doesn't shout, it whispers. But that whisper grows louder every time you walk away without the answers you came for. And over time, it chips away at your confidence, your trust, your ability to believe what you're told. You don't have to accept vagueness as normal. Ask for clarity, not aggressively, but directly. If someone truly respects you, they'll give it, and if they keep dancing around the truth, they're telling you, without saying a word, that honesty isn't a priority for them. Real connection demands clarity. Real trust demands truth. And anyone who refuses to meet you with those things, no matter how charming or confident they seem, is someone you need to look at more closely. Because behind the vague words, behind the soft smile, behind the endless fog, there's often something they hope you'll never see. 8. Emotionally too perfect. When they react a little too right to be real. There's something eerily unsettling about a person who always knows exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. They're calm in every storm, understanding without hesitation, never flustered, never thrown off. They validate you at the perfect moment, offer just enough empathy to make you feel heard, and respond with surgical emotional control. At first glance, it feels like you've met someone incredibly mature, wise beyond their years. Emotionally grounded, composed. But look again, because behind that flawless display might not be depth, it might be deception. When someone's emotional reactions feel too polished, too convenient, too rehearsed, that's when you should start paying attention. Because genuine emotion, the kind that comes from real connection and honesty, is rarely that perfect. It's messy. It stumbles. It contradicts itself. It gets awkward. True vulnerability doesn't arrive in a neatly wrapped package. It leaks through the cracks. Unsure, raw, and sometimes even contradictory. But emotional manipulation? That's smooth. That's calculated. That's engineered to disarm you. I once had a conversation with someone who was always emotionally perfect. Every concern I brought up was met with ideal levels of compassion. They never raised their voice, never lost their cool, never even hesitated. It felt like talking to a therapist who had memorized all the right lines. But the deeper we went, the more I noticed something off. There were no mistakes, no moments of struggle, no flashes of real confusion or conflict. Just a constant stream of measured, flawless emotional performance. It was like speaking to someone who'd rehearsed every possible outcome before we ever even talked. That's when I realized this wasn't authenticity. This was emotional stagecraft, a performance built not to connect, but to control. And that's what makes this kind of manipulation so dangerous. It doesn't rely on lies or avoidance. It relies on precision, on feeding you exactly what your heart wants, just enough to lower your defenses. It creates the illusion of safety, not through truth, but through carefully curated behavior that mimics truth. You see, the best liars don't just manipulate facts. They manipulate feelings. They study what makes people feel secure, validated, understood, and then they mirror it back with stunning accuracy. They give you the impression that they're being real by playing the role of someone who's emotionally available, grounded, evolved, but it's all surface. What you're seeing isn't a window into their soul. It's a mask designed to reflect your expectations. And here's how you know it's not real: it lacks emotional friction. In a real relationship, even the most loving people misstep. They say the wrong thing. They overreact. They contradict themselves. But they also apologize, clarify, grow. That's what makes it real. But when someone is always just right, always emotionally in sync without ever faltering, it doesn't feel warm. It feels cold, too perfect, too consistent, like a lake with no ripples, no depth, no soul. True emotional presence shows up in the tension, in the humanity. It shows up when someone says, "I don't know how to respond to that," or "I'm struggling to understand, but I'm trying." Those are signs of honesty. But when someone gives you perfection, every time, without ever showing a crack in the surface, you're not being met with truth. You're being managed. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because it feels good at first. It feels like connection. But later, when the curtain slips, you realize you were the only one truly feeling anything. This kind of emotional manipulation is harder to detect because it doesn't come with obvious red flags. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't disappear in conflict. It doesn't deflect. It leans in, too smoothly, too precisely. And it's only when you step back that you realize you've been part of a show, a beautifully crafted performance that was never meant to reach your heart, only to gain your trust. If you've ever walked away from a deep conversation with someone and thought, "Why did that feel empty even though they said all the right things?" That's your gut speaking. Because your intuition isn't fooled by perfection. It senses the absence of something real. And when you feel that absence over and over again, no matter how well they speak, no matter how tender they seem, it's time to question what they're really giving you. Because it's not emotional intimacy. It's illusion. You deserve people who show up not with performances, but with presence. People who sometimes get it wrong, who fumble, who admit they don't have the perfect answer, Because those people aren't hiding. They're trying. And trying is always more real than pretending. Be wary of emotional perfection. Because in reality, the most honest connections don't come from flawless responses. They come from flawed people willing to be seen anyway. Conclusion: spotting lies isn't about being suspicious. It's about choosing self-respect. Lies don't always arrive dressed in betrayal. Sometimes, they wear a smile. They nod in agreement. They act calm. They sound thoughtful. But beneath the charm, the vagueness, the polished stories, the laughter that avoids truth, and the perfect emotional reactions that feel just a little too perfect, there's a quiet strategy at play. To stay hidden while appearing open. You've just walked through 8 subtle, yet powerful signs someone might be lying to you, not just with words, but with tone, posture, timing, and emotion. These signs won't always scream for your attention. They whisper, and if you're not tuned in, you'll miss them. You'll miss the sideways glances, the deflections, the half-answers that seem full, and the soothing voices that make your instincts go quiet. But once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them, and that's your power, awareness. This isn't about becoming paranoid or confrontational. It's about protecting your peace. It's about honoring your gut when something feels off. And it's about drawing a line, not to push people away, but to protect the version of you that refuses to live in the shadows of someone else's dishonesty. If this video helped you sharpen your awareness, hit that like button, not just for the algorithm, but because truth deserves a louder voice. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. And if you want to keep growing with us, building clarity, confidence, and stoic strength, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Because in a world full of noise, we're here to help you hear what's real. Stay sharp, stay grounded, stay true.